right, diving in to another exorcism type movie. Good thing or not, I don't know. I know there's plenty of you out there that like them. I've had my complaints about the ones I've seen recently. But let's see what this one has to offer. Starting with the IMDb plot. While performing an unauthorized exorcism on his father, an elite exorcist suspects the entity he's doing battle with might be a holy being, perhaps even God. All right. Maybe trying to give us something a little bit different. Maybe not. Obviously, that is a big problem with some of these exorcism movies in my eyes. But anyway, let's see. This is a new one on Shudder, recently released. So I'm sure some of you have seen it. Maybe some of you have not yet. I know I didn't catch it right before it came out. So with that, I'll still kind of try to be spoiler free. I guess there is a thing or two to spoil. So I'll try to leave that out for you guys. But yeah, the basics of this is exorcism movie, and I don't know. I seem less and less thrilled by many that we've seen lately, because it just seems to be, a very similar thing that's kind of happening time after time. You end up at the end of the day with someone strapped to a bed, and we go through the whole procedure thing, and maybe they try to scare you in a certain way, or try to do something crazy, and the person bends up backwards and upside down and that kind of thing, and we get all that kind of stuff. So. And then a lot of it is just about, the priest and whatever they're going through. So, this one, maybe kind of goes down a different avenue, and kind of maybe takes you out of that focus. I mean, we still get a little bit of that here. Certainly in the opening scene, we get that. But this one has, maybe does try to open the door to going in a different direction. But again, I don't necessarily know that worked for it. Like I said, some people had already seen this before I did, and I did catch, a couple of comments on it. And one thing that I know that people said, so I don't want to say that I'm stealing the thought here, but is that this movie kind of moved, kind of fast, and fast meaning, well, it is an hour and 27 minutes, but I mean, not fast by time necessarily, but just going through the story real quick. It didn't seem like maybe certain things were built up or explained maybe enough. And, I had no idea, obviously, that going into it. But then after watching the movie, I can see kind of why, and I kind of agree with that sentiment, that, it kind of moved from A to Z rather quickly, and maybe left out a few letters in between. Which, kind of, maybe left it, I don't know, confusing, but just, maybe you weren't into it as much as maybe you should have or could have been, if maybe certain things were introduced in a different way. To kind of guide you a little bit through it, yeah, the movie opens, we get introduced to the main exorcist here. He is in the middle of an exorcism there. There is another priest by his side. A little bit of a different circumstance here, because the person is in a wheelchair. I don't remember exactly what their handicap was, but they were in a wheelchair, the possessed person, that is. And, then, we go through the whole thing of him trying to get the demon out, and, some craziness happens and whatever. And that's, kind of how it opens, and kind of gets you in the mood. So we get to learn the main guy, and then apparently we learn, as that kind of opening kind of comes to an end, that exorcisms are happening in other places now, and for whatever reason. So it's a little bit of a thing going on, a little bit of a problem, and that, he's being told by whoever, his higher up priest or whatever that he's talking to, that to kind of keep this a secret and not whatever. So he goes back home after he finished this, or I don't know if it was home or someplace familiar to him. And in the process, he meets up with a woman who he's very good friends with. I don't know if they, were previously together before he became a priest or whatever. Maybe they were. But, kind of gets into, some talking with her, again, when we want to talk about kind of the story moving forward and whatever, and maybe stuff being unexplained, you kind of get maybe a glimpse or two of maybe, that relationship between them and their beginning conversations. But, then the story moves forward and you never really kind of get into that. So, obviously, they are important to each other, and you'll see that kind of later on, but it never really dives too much into it. And I'm usually okay with that kind of thing. I don't, always want huge explanations and character development. I'm okay with that usually. But, I guess because of the kind of movie it is, maybe it just needed more. But between their relationship, not so much. It's something else that happens in the movie that maybe needed a little bit more digging into to kind of grasp and kind of really get you more into what is happening here. Very oddly, not long after he's there, a sheriff, I guess he was the sheriff, he's a important police guy in the area, kind of brings the guy's father back. There's obviously something wrong with him and so forth, but he basically says, here's your father, I can't do anything with him, blah, blah. Maybe hints at, there is a possession going on there, something like that, but he's not really sure. And then the cop kind of goes away, and then the guy takes his father back inside and so forth. And they, start having conversations and weird conversations and, kind of tending in that direction of is he okay? Something else going on. Maybe he is possessed and something. But it almost seems like, you don't really know, or at least maybe unless I missed it, too much more about, what happened to the father before, and so forth, and how he's kind of gotten involved with this. I think maybe they try to dive into it a little bit, but it's still a little bit unclear. On the flip side of it, and then this is the kind of side of it that I wish they would have explored more, is you see another weird guy here, and he's got a couple of men with him that are basically doing his bidding. And, they eventually stop the sheriff after the sheriff is, driven a ways away from here, looking for the father. And, obviously when he doesn't really tell them where he is, they kill him. And, they have a hunch now where he might be. So, they start moving in that direction. But, it just seems like this guy who eventually is important in the story just kind of popped out of nowhere. And, I think one of the things missed in the story is maybe at the beginning or maybe at some other time, maybe we would have gotten a better introduction to who this guy is and, maybe shown him do something else or something or, I don't know what. It just kind of opens the door and then we see, him kind of have this following and it almost becomes like a cult and they kind of go down that avenue. But, I guess it's just the way that side of the story was presented. I just felt like it was missing, and I was always behind the ball on what is happening there. We kind of flip back to the priest and his father, and they go through all this religious talk or whatever. The woman kind of goes away, and she stumbles into her own problem, which will eventually become his problem. But, that's kind of awkward how she even kind of... she goes and I don't remember exactly what her position is, but, I don't know if she was a therapist or something. And she goes and has a weird conversation with somebody else, which just leads her to go investigate something and then leads her into trouble. And it just seemed like you needed something more there to kind of define her place in the story and why she would just go and do that, especially go and do that without really telling him. And then, he has this thing with his father, and then he decides to do an exorcist on his father, which leads to more weirdness. And then, I'm just kind of gathering. I guess I don't want to go much further than that point because, they kind of make that a little bit clear in the summary at the beginning that he doesn't do an exorcism on them. But there's more to the story that kind of happens after that. And I don't know if I want to go into too much of that and kind of spoil that for you guys. But, I think, kind of having this other guy there who's on the search for the father, and then he's kind of got this cult and whatever thing going on. Uh, not unique, but maybe, it kind of changes the story up a little bit. Kind of, it's not necessarily about tying someone down and just doing an exorcism to kind of end the movie and bring up all that drama. While they still kind of end up doing that kind of thing in a way. It is more, I guess, in a cult atmosphere. And again, we've seen, maybe, some cult-like things involved in exorcism as well. But this, I guess that kind of gives it, that something a little bit different that maybe, I like. But I don't know. I just think that the way that side of the story was introduced, I don't know. It just seemed like something missing. Like, I would have liked a different introduction to them. Maybe if we would have seen a little bit more why they were a cult to begin with, as opposed to, okay, here's a cult. You do kind of get that explanation of what they're looking for, what they expect at the end of the day, out of what is happening at the end of the movie. I mean, you do get an explanation, not that they don't, but it's just that, it just seems, I guess, maybe a little bit forced, a little bit like they're just there, and we're just supposed to assume that okay, now we're going to learn about them in a rush, in a hurry, while all the drama's kind of unfolding, as opposed to maybe learning something about them before. You do kind of see along the way that, maybe one or two other people that we get introduced along the way, are in the cult or know of the cult or whatever. So, it is there, but, and you kind of almost even gather that even our main character, the priest, maybe he knows that they're there. Maybe he's not totally surprised by it happening. I don't know. Again, of course, like I said, we will get another exorcism and so forth and that kind of thing. And it gets, we get that kind of drama thing at the end and so forth. But I don't know. I just, and I'm going to say that I wasn't all totally sold on the acting of everything either. And maybe the characters. I don't know. I just, again, I don't always I don't have to care for the characters, dive into the characters, or super love them one way or the other. But I don't know. It just seemed like, maybe something was off. Not really, getting into it. I guess things just maybe did move along too fast. I hope I watched this now. I like I said, I kind of had that thought already in my head as I watched it. So I'm hoping I didn't watch this already expecting it, and that's kind of what's happened here. Which is, why I don't typically read full reviews before or whatever, but, sometimes you just kind of, see the tweet or whatever, and you can't get out of it after that. But I don't know. It did just seem like I don't know, something was missing, or just the way about how things kind of unfolded. I wasn't super excited about where they were going with it and what happened. With this cult, I guess. It led to an interesting scene. It was okay. Maybe even that could have been even a little bit more bloodier. It would have made me a little bit more happier, maybe. And obviously, again, kind of tries to kind of end the movie in a little bit different way than just having, someone strapped to the bed at the end of the movie and them, trying to pull the demon out and all that drama. But, I don't know. I still don't think, it cut it for me at the end of the day. So, exorcism type movies are really, having a hard time with me right now. I just, not super invested in them and not super, enjoying many of them lately. It just because it just, a typical repeat in one way or the other. The same could be said about shark movies. You guys know how I feel about the shark movies. God, I watched one the other day. No, I'm not going to go that direction. But it is just what it is. So I think at the end of the day, I'm just gonna give this one 1.5 pools of blood. Again, hopefully I didn't kind of get it tainted in my mind, and hopefully I didn't subtract and be unfair to the movie with already a thought in my head about what was going to happen. But yeah, I guess I just never really sold into it and really got into what exactly was happening here, especially in not that it wasn't explained. They do go through a little bit of the explanation for, but I don't know, just not seeing other things happen just didn't make me as interested in what they were trying to do. Maybe if they had taken it from maybe that angle a little bit more and a little bit more prior, then maybe it would have made it a little bit more impactful or something. I don't know. So yeah, I'm gonna go with 1.5 pools of blood for this one. So and that is out of 5. So with that, horrorsquaredreviews.blogspot.com, so you can find all of my reviews written in video. Certainly tons of video reviews of Elite. So if you want, you can just like and subscribe and do everything else that everybody wants to do here on YouTube. If not, no worries, it is okay. I thank you for your time regardless. Twitter, Facebook information down below as well, so you can reach out if you want to talk about this one and your thoughts, and maybe you felt the same way, or maybe you really love the movie, I don't know. And definitely in the comment section, your thoughts, and maybe your thoughts on recent exorcism movies. Are you kind of in the same boat as me? You're a little tired of seeing kind of the same thing, or maybe this was different enough for you. I don't know. So with that, I will catch you on the next review, horror fans.